Amid one of the most violent waves of unrest in recent Iranian history, a prominent filmmaker says Iran's regime may not endure. But is the Islamic Republic truly on the brink of collapse, or is the government stronger than it appears? Iran's profound political crisis continues to draw attention not only for its human cost, but for questions about the future of the regime itself. Thousands of protesters have been killed, tens of thousands arrested, and major cities have seen streets filled with demonstrations, marking the most intense challenge to the Islamic Republic since the revolution. In the middle of this turmoil, one of Iran's most outspoken cultural figures has made an extraordinary prediction about the country's political trajectory. Film director Jafar Panahi, an Iranian filmmaker known internationally for his work and his own battles with censorship and imprisonment, has publicly stated that Iran's current regime will not be able to keep control in the long run. Speaking abroad, Panahi linked the current repression to a history of state violence and expressed confidence that the regime's collapse is inevitable, even though he did not specify exactly when it might happen. Panahi's comments go beyond artistic commentary. They reflect a deep frustration with how authorities responded to popular dissent. His film work has often explored themes of state power, violence, and resistance, and his latest remarks suggest that the brutal crackdown on protests aimed at quelling the uprising may have instead weakened the regime's legitimacy in the eyes of many Iranians. He pointed to the regime's brutal suppression, including lethal force against unarmed demonstrators, as evidence that those in power are more focused on survival than the welfare of the people. Panahi also warned against viewing Iran's rulers as rational actors in international diplomacy, arguing that their focus on self-preservation undermines their legitimacy. This perspective is echoed by some in the Iranian diaspora and opposition movements. Figures such as Reza Pahlavi, the exiled son of Iran's last Shah, have also asserted that the Islamic Republic is nearing an end. Pahlavi has claimed that the government's grip is weakening and called for greater international support for the Iranian people as the regime faces mounting internal pressure. However, the question of whether the regime can actually collapse is far from settled. Some analysts point out that authoritarian systems like Iran's are often highly resilient. They argue that the Islamic Republic's power structure, anchored by the Islamic Revolutionary Corps and a deeply entrenched security apparatus, is designed to absorb social pressure while preserving central authority. These forces are embedded across society, with influence in politics, the economy, and security, making it difficult for popular unrest alone to trigger regime collapse. Moreover, the IRGC and allied institutions act not just as military forces, but as political and economic pillars for the regime. They control key economic sectors and have extensive networks that allow them to monitor and suppress dissent at community levels. It is this deep entrenchment, experts say, that allows the regime to continue functioning even amid widespread discontent. In addition to structural resilience, the notion of regime collapse depends on multiple factors beyond public protests, such as elite defection, splits within security forces, economic breakdown, and international pressure. While protests have been nationwide and unprecedented in scale, there is currently limited evidence that key figures within the regime's power structure are turning against leadership in any decisive way. Yet, some opposition voices argue that persistent unrest, combined with economic deterioration and social fragmentation, could gradually erode the state's capacity to govern. They point to historical examples where authoritarian governments eventually fell under sustained internal pressure and loss of legitimacy. Another dimension in this debate is the role of global politics. Iran's place in regional and global power struggles adds complexity. External actors may influence the internal balance through diplomatic pressure, sanctions, or support for civil society, but direct intervention has broadly been avoided due to the risks of escalation. In the end, while voices like Panahi's reflect a profound frustration and a belief that change is coming, many analysts caution against simplistic predictions of imminent collapse. Iran's political system remains deeply institutionalized, and while protests reveal cracks in the regime's legitimacy, those cracks do not necessarily mean it will fall in the near future. However, what is clear is that the protests and the government's response have shaken the foundations of Iranian politics in ways that will echo for years. The legacy of these events could be transformative, whether through eventual political change, reform from within, or prolonged instability. In summary, the question of whether Iran's regime can survive remains deeply contested. While figures like filmmaker Jafar Panahi predict an eventual collapse, others point to the regime's structural resilience and entrenched security apparatus as stabilizing forces. As Iran navigates this period of upheaval, the outcome, whether continuity, transformation, or breakdown, will shape not just the country's future, but the geopolitical landscape of the wider Middle East. Stay informed, because understanding the deeper currents behind headlines is key to making sense of a world in flux.